SuperAgers, individuals who are in their 80s, but their cognitive performance and capacity resembles of a 50, 60-year-old. It's a pretty good aspiration for a lot of us to have.
The study talks about the role of the hippocampus, okay? That hippocampus is actually supercharged. Well, we know that people who have high spermidine levels have thicker hippocampuses than people that don't.
I want to talk a little bit about how these people not only have physical and mental fitness, but they have social fitness too.
What are the habits or the traits of SuperAger? They have purpose-driven lifestyles. We talked about this. There's continuous learning and novel challenges, but there's high physical activity. Not intense physical activity, but high physical activity, especially walking, zone 1, zone 2 kind of stuff.
And these are not things you need fancy equipment for. These are not that you need all the biohacking gadgets in the world. You don't need an expensive gym membership. So that's why I love it.
Now, the question is that as we age, how can we support healthy mitochondria?
Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast, where we are helping you build a resilient body without losing your mind. And speaking of the mind, today we're going to talk about the brain.
Speaking of losing your mind, here's our co-host.
Yes. Let me introduce you to Don. So Don is my co-host, and you know him really well by now.
And I lost my mind
Honestly,
a long time ago.
We all lose our minds a little bit every now and then.
Yeah, that's good.
But we want to talk about this one study that just came out recently. Well, it wasn't like a study that's been completed. It's ongoing for like 25 years, studying SuperAgers, individuals who are in their 80s, but their cognitive performance and capacity resembles of a 50, 60-year-old. So it's a pretty good aspiration for a lot of us to have. Do you have, or did you have anybody in the family? Do you know anybody who was into their 80s, 90s?
Yeah, it's so, and we'll talk about this in the show about the, what the characteristics is. But my father lived into his 70s, early 70s, but he's lucky because when he was 4 years younger than I am now, he had a massive coronary. My younger brother was playing football for Ohio State, and he was down standing on the sideline, and he has, and my dad was a 3-pack a day cigarette smoker, stress. He broke all the rules. And luckily, we were at the University of Michigan, and they were doing research on an enzyme called TPA. It's the clot busting enzyme. And so, listen, if you're going to have a heart attack, standing in the middle of a Big Ten football game is a pretty good place to do this because there are medics everywhere. There are ambulances right outside. So he didn't have to. And, oh, by the way, my mother was a CCU RN. My sister-in-law was an ER RN. And he was standing next to the center's father, who was a cardiologist. And
he was in good hands, to say the least.
Listen, and they all, what was cool, all three of them recognized that he was going south, and they jumped. And then all of a sudden, the staff from the University of Michigan, the football stadium staff, the first aid staff was on him. And then we get him to the University of Michigan Hospital. And again, this is an Ohio State guy saying this, and I don't know if you understand the rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan. It is probably the biggest in the country, so I'm giving him a lot of credit. But he lived another 23, 24 years after that, saw all of his grandchildren born. And so but my mother made it to 84. Mom, and that's a good thing because we're going to talk about mitochondria, and mitochondria comes from your mother. And so that's a good thing. So, my grandmother on my dad's side lived into her late 80s. So we have some decent genetics, but my grandfather on my dad's side died very young, in his 60s. So we've got some agers, but we average it out with some poor performers.
That's funny. Yeah.
What about
you? Similar. And nobody really had any type of cardiac issue, thankfully, in my family. But in terms of my grandparents, they were all in their 80s. I believe my grandpa on my dad's side may have been early in his late 80s. But as far as I can remember, and as far as I know, everyone in my family history was cognitively there. Mm-hmm. So there was not much of a neurodegeneration. in a little bit in my grandmother and my mom's side, but other than that, it's been very nice. And I look at my dad, he's 81. He's as sharp as ever, and he defies all rules. Like, the guy doesn't really exercise.
Yeah.
He smokes cigarettes occasionally, and, like, he goes in waves, like, "I'm smoking again, and then I'm done, and then I'm doing it again." So he goes in waves. But he did have a 30-year gap where he didn't do it, and he stresses more than anybody should, and his sleep is trash. I don't like, his body is just so resilient, and he's so cognitively there. He defies all rules of what it takes to be healthy,
Sure.
and it's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But
You
I
have to
hope
pay.
I have those genes.
Well, it's interesting to look at this and to look at stress because, and we'll put a link in the show notes to this Northwestern article, and it has a great piece in it. But the thing I picked up from it, from the SuperAgers, was the early stress that those people went through. One was born in the middle of an earthquake in Istanbul, Turkey. The other was a Holocaust survivor, or a survivor of the German takeover of Germany, of the Nazi takeover of Germany. So, the early stress, and this is one of the challenges I think we have, Klaudia, is we use this word stress as a negative. It's strictly a negative. We don't use it, but there's a positive. There are stresses. There are positive stresses. Whether it's through life or whether it's through choice, how we respond to those and how we manage the distresses is important. There will be distress.
Yes.
We had them, and Nietzsche said, "What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger." You know,
It's so true in
you
many
can take it
levels.
to an extent, but there's some truth to that.
It's interesting. I know that's just a tiny side note here, that I was listening to a podcast recently, and Simon Sinek mentioned this thing called post-traumatic stress resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having all of those mental issues that comes from post-traumatic stress disorder,
Mm-hmm.
turning it into resilience, so turning your traumatic experience into your strength, into something that gives you resilience and makes you stronger
Could be a
and
superpower.
helps you achieve. Was very interesting, and it's not his concept. I can't remember whose concept it was, but I haven't heard it before. It's post-traumatic stress resilience. Yes, stress makes us stronger if we are able to use it in a way that doesn't cripple us, but builds us better
That
and
if
more
is an
resilient.
interesting two-letter word, isn't it? If.
Yes,
So,
yes,
but
yes.
we're
So the
talking
study,
about resilience in life, the ability to keep breathing as many days as we can, and that's what that was a great article about. So we really recommend it to our listeners.
yeah. And I have to say, I'm starting to see that what I would love people to recognize is to start to weigh in optimization versus resilience. I think instead of over optimizing everything, you just want to create the routine, the diet, the sleep schedule, the stress management, all of those little things for you that makes you more resilient as opposed to more optimized. Because I'm not sure if optimization might be putting people into their own self-engineered prisons as opposed to resilience that is liberating you to withstand. Because like you said, what they saw, it was very interesting. One of the researchers of this Northwestern University superaging program talks about how they look at various metrics of these individuals, including fMRIs of the brain, including blood work, including they do cognitive tests, executive function tests. And interestingly, they looked at some of the biomarkers that are linked to Alzheimer's, like the beta
Mm-hmm.
amyloid plaques and the tau something. I will
Yeah, the
forget,
tau
but we'll
protein
link it in the show
tangles.
notes. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And they noticed that superagers had very similar amount of beta amyloids than those who were that age yet had Alzheimer's or some
Mm-hmm.
type of neurodegeneration. So it's not necessarily that they don't have those, but that their brain and their body is more resilient to fighting them off or to still remaining in a healthy state despite those things being present that show up in Alzheimer's patients.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting.
Listen, we live in a very interesting time. I listened to a Peter Diamante's podcast, and Peter's famous for saying we live in the best time we could have ever lived in history right now. Now,
Yeah.
some people, it's challenging to some people, but it's generally good. But our time in history is important. And I go back to when we look at age, when I was born in the early 1960s, the average life expectancy had worked its way up to 70 by that point. Now it's moving up into the 80s. So in just the 10 years I've been on, in in the 60 years I've been on this earth, we've increased life expectancy by 10 years. When my mother and father were born in the 30s, life expectancy was in the high to mid 40s. So we're starting to see this hockey stick in the graph of how long you live. So you have to, and now here's what we're running into now is that we're living so long that some of the processes of aging are starting to show up because we died way too early before to ever see those. Why is Alzheimer's expanding? Well, because we're living longer. And all of a sudden, the impact of our choices is really starting to make a difference because, when you look at age, length of life, largely flat out of the late 1600s into the early 1700s. So in the 40 range, the average person lived. Now that's an average because people lived. There were 80-year-olds then. The reason the average was so low is because there were so many children die early. This was what drives down a lot of the average life expectancies. People live for a long time, but the number of children that died drives the average way down. And then we take a look at what changed. Well, back in the 90s, we dug the Panama Canal in Panama in the early 90s, and we had the people that were digging the canal were dying of mosquito-borne illnesses, plagues, malaria, things like that. And this is where we see the onset of public health initiatives. They went down, drained water, improved sanitation. All of a sudden, people lived longer on that. So we also see the improvement of hygiene. We see the emergence of vaccinations, particularly in childhood illnesses. This is what's so important. In the mid 1800s, we had this thing called gangrene. So we're putting these people into battle. The weapons are fairly archaic. They're brutal wounds. And these wounds, if they had to amputate a limb, we just started to mess around with anesthesia. That was very early stage, but there weren't antibiotics by that time. And gangrene, which is a strep infection, is this is what scared the soldiers the most. It wasn't being wounded in battle. It was going into a hospital and getting gangrene, because that death is a bad death. And remember, so Louis Pasteur published germ theory in 1861. Okay, so this is just prior to the onset of the Civil War. We have the discovery of penicillin in the late 1920s. So we're starting to see the science step up and say, okay, we've got some solutions which are increasing lifespan. And now we see increased lifespan. I don't know. Do you know anybody that's died from malaria? Do you know? I mean, we've not had many plagues.
Yeah.
We've not had, our public health has done a great job of resolving a lot of this, but now we're living so long that all of a sudden our cognitive challenges are starting to develop as we age, and we're starting to see this separation between lifespan and health span. We can keep you alive, but your health span might not be quite what you want. You may finish your life living life you don't particularly care for.
Yeah, thank you so much for that history, because some of it is something I haven't even looked into in the recent years. So that's very cool to know. And yes, it brings up a fantastic point in terms of how just the prevention of those and treatment of those infectious diseases has made a massive difference in our lifespan. And then comes now we're starting to pay attention to, how do I increase my health span? How do I not live the last 10 years, 15 years, having a polypharmacy in my cabinet, having multiple metabolic conditions or some type of a some type of an aging disease that is stealing your joy, stealing your vitality, and not giving you the energy to enjoy those late years, which can be just as fun. I mean, the people who these researchers interviewed, they seem to be in such great spirit. And I mean, there are some tips and tricks that we'll dive into, but you can have a very joyful and lovely time even into your late years. And I think I saw one of the, with Biohack Yourself. So we have, the owners have two kids. I can't remember, 5 and 7 or 5 and 8 year old, a boy and a girl. And they interviewed a 102-year-old gentleman recently. And it's so nice to see that, that 102-year-old gentleman is in great spirit. He's just having the time of his life, even though he's way past our average life expectancy now.
Sure.
And so there are ways that we can build up the foundation of our body, mind, and not only that. So I want to talk a little bit about how these people not only have physical and mental fitness, but they have social fitness too. They all have this fantastic social life that is not just falling into their lap, but they're actively making an effort to be part of a group.
I've thought about this a lot, and I'll tell you what drives it for me is I've mentioned on the podcast many times what I call my rocks in the jar, the 4 big rocks in the jar of purpose. And I've had people ask me about this, and I have not included social as one of my rocks. And I go back and forth. Should I have it in there? And I don't have it in there right now, mainly because I believe social is part of the purpose. Okay, it's
I can
part
see
of
that.
the jar. And so I look at this a lot, and there's no doubt that social is critical. What I'm saying, in the absence of quality movement, your social will drop. In the absence of quality food and nutrient dense food, your social will drop. In the absence of quality sleep, your social will drop. In the absence of quality light, your social will drop. And your purpose, listen, at the end of the day, this is what drives me. It's kind of interesting because I never thought about this before, but I'm 17 years away from 80 years old. Okay. 17 years ago, I was raising a teenager.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm now 17 years away from 80. And for me, I just can't even conceptualize it. I just don't. But at the same time, I had a life-threatening event 4 years ago, and it's kind of re-racked this thought process, getting my knee back into shape. I got to go ski last winter on the big mountains, which I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do. Did it this year. I'm buying a freaking Epic Pass. Okay, I'm skiing 20 days this year. I don't give a shit. I'm skiing 20 days. um so I'm continuing to push because that's what I love. Okay. Now, I don't know what's going to take me out. I'll tell you, it scares me to look at things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and things like that. And I'm starting to pay attention to that. Should I have paid attention to that 20 years ago when I was in my 40s? I don't know. When I was in my 40s 20 years ago, I had a good exercise routine. I've had I'm an exercise scientist. This is what I do for a living. So it's been a big part of my life, right? Not everybody has that advantage. But I've always been a mover. I've not been a good eater. Okay.
Mhm.
Michael Pollan described it as food like substances. I love shitty food. I just love it. But I'm constantly pushing
It's the
myself to
kryptonite.
eat. Yeah, that's no doubt about it. That's my kryptonite. And it's not sweets. It's really weird. But anyway, so, as we look at this super aging, there's certainly a fear of mine, cognitive decline. It is a huge
Mhm.
fear of mine. Maybe it's my fear because my physical's maybe in touch and cognitive is the thing that I don't have as much control over. I don't know. It could be
Well, do you do anything? I mean, you read a lot, which
a
is one
lot.
of the things that a lot of these SuperAgers do. They read a lot. I don't know if you speak another language, but there's that is one wonderful way which some of these SuperAgers had in common, that they spoke another language. So I do have an advantage there.
There you
That
go.
is great. Yeah.
No, I
And the
don't
other,
speak
yeah.
another language. I struggle with English. Okay, so this is part of my challenge. If you listen to the podcast, you know I struggle with English, but but there's a lot of things I do read a lot. Here's what I bank on, Klaudia. I don't plan on retiring. Um,
That's
I'm
great.
not working for a date to then play golf every day. Um, I want to stay in this game literally as long as I can. I do believe in the value of the senior in the community. I think we have to respect the elders. Um, they have experience, and that experience is gold. It's
Mm,
absolute gold. Um, and I want to continue to leverage that. But at the same time, Klaudia, I'm learning every day. Um,
that's great.
the amount of information that comes, I am just absolutely passionate about. But at the same time, I'm also passionate about teaching. So I don't plan on retiring. If anything, by the time we settle out there in the Lake Tahoe area, if I hit the right lottery, we're going to have a really cool spa, and that's where I want to wake up and go to in the morning, and then go ski for the day, and then come back and work in the afternoon. That's my jam. And
Cool.
that's kind of what I want to keep doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think retirement is overrated and a lot of people can't wait to retire. But once they do, they realize, wait, I'm not working. If you don't have another thing to go toward and forward, that retirement is only going to slow you down and atrophy in so many ways.
I've seen so many people retire then die.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
literally,
common.
and there's no time between the two. It's so
Yeah.
little. And I don't buy it. So, but so let's jump back into the article and
Yes,
talk
I
about.
want to go into the mitochondria because you have a lot of cool talking points. So, leading up to that, I just want to share with our listeners that some of the findings of this research, this ongoing research, has shown a few interesting things in the brain of those superagers. One of them being their neurons and how those neurons behave. The researcher described the structural brain differences as their neurons have a lot more, they're a lot healthier, they are stronger as their peers' brain cells and neurons, which is
Right.
very interesting because it's one of those things where neurogenesis is still taking place. Their neurons are firing and wiring at a at a rate that somebody in their 50s and 60s, which is fantastic. And their attention, their memory, their emotional regulation remain very robust into those ages. And that's just something we all should be thriving for, to be able to maintain a cognitively healthy lifestyle. And one of the things that plays a huge role in that is the mitochondria, the
Hmm.
powerhouse, the place where energy is made in our cells. So, can you give us a little bit of a scientific lowdown on why is it so important?
Yeah. So think about this for a second. So we have roughly 30 trillion cells in our body. Now, not all of those cells have mitochondria, but most of them do. Okay. And the cells that live the longest, our longest lived cells, are our neuronal cells. These are the
Mm,
ones that are in place. The ones that are the shortest are like your skin cells, but the neuronal cells are the ones that live the longest. So you have 30 trillion cells. In those 30 trillion cells, some of those cells may have over 1,000 mitochondria in the cell. It's not one or two, it's thousands. And particularly energy demanding cells. What are the most energy demanding cells? Well, the organ in your body that requires the most energy is your brain. Um, about 20%, 25% of the energy from your body goes to your brain, comes from your brain. So this is the level of importance there. Now, the question is that as we age, how can we support healthy mitochondria? Well, there's kind of two sides to that equation that we start to look at, that we want healthy biogenesis, mitochondrial biogenesis. So your mitochondria has the DNA that came from your mother. This is the important thing about that. So the mitochondria are really special. They sit down in those cells carrying a DNA package different than the nucleus of the cell. They have their own. Now, when there's a demand for another mitochondria, you'll see this fusion and a fission process for creating new mitochondria. But if you're making mitochondria from bad mitochondria, you're making more bad mitochondria. So how do we get rid of bad mitochondria so we don't have that? Well, we employ a process called autophagy or mitophagy, mitochondrial autophagy. This is the reason that we like autophagy so much. This is the reason fasting is a beneficial process. It's the reason you're seeing so much interest in this. You and I met when I was working for a company called Longevity Labs, and we had a product that was called Spermidine Life. There's this little molecule that's called spermidine that we know when spermidine's present, we have an increase in autophagy. Well, they've gone ahead to discover that not only is it just there correlationally, that spermidine may actually methylate some of the autophagy genes. It's critical. So if you fast without spermidine on board, you don't get autophagy. This is really important. So it comes along. So we want to increase mitochondrial biogenesis. We want to increase the signals. What increases the signal? Energy demand, oxygen demand, exercise. This is the benefit of exercise. And I'll also go back. You and I have talked about the change in my HRV when I was living up in altitude, that as you have a drop in air pressure, you have a drop in the partial pressure of oxygen in the body. The body's got to respond. It's going to make more mitochondria, and everything gets better, including your HRV. So this is, recognizing the impact of exercise in mitochondrial mitogenesis is really important. You want to make sure and improve mitophagy, the digestion of bad, used up mitochondria. Exercise is a big part of that, but also paying attention to this thing that's called oxidative stress. Okay, so oxidative stress in the mitochondria, we have a process in there that's called electron transport. There's 5 phases of this. And in the electron transport phase, if you have too much energy coming into your mitochondria, then what's going out? There's a disconnect in this electron transport, and that disconnect causes reactive oxygen species to be thrown off. If your energy's low, if your energy intake is low, but your energy output is low too, that disconnect can happen late in the phase as well. So you can get this reactive oxygen species stress either from the overconsumption or the underutilization of energy. So these are the things. This is the reason why balanced diet. And the third part of this that I think is critical is the role of glucose. Glucose loves to throw off reactive oxygen species. And this is, I go back to when I was a college athlete, and everyone was talking about and this is in the early 90s, and they were talking about the role of sugar. And this is being driven by big corporations that make sugar-laced drinks. We probably overblew that. We probably overmotivated. We probably overconsumed. So when we start to play around with ketone bodies and the value of oxidative energy production rather than glycolytic energy production, there's a shift there. These are the kind of things that come together, and it's all about mitochondrial health, production, and elimination of the old mitochondria. How about that for a dive down the rabbit hole?
It is so I'm like listening with like both ears like this. It is so interesting because a lot of the things that you mentioned are all part of this 12 hallmarks of aging, these pillars that cause us to age or sort of describe the rate at which we're aging. And mitochondrial dysfunction is literally one of them. And it's at the root of how our body creates energy and how upstream can we function better or worse. So that's very interesting. And we have mitochondria in our brain, right?
Absolutely. You have the most. This is where the most of it is. And, a way to think about it is that everything from here down in your body is there to support from here up. Okay.
Mm,
The body's there to keep the brain alive,
yeah.
really, when it comes right down to it. So, how you treat from the ears down determines what happens from the ears up many times. And this is one of the challenges, and these are the things that we start to look at. What are the habits or the traits of SuperAger? Well, they have purpose. They have purpose-driven lifestyles. We talked about this. There's continuous learning and novel challenges, but there's high physical activity. Not intense physical
Not
activity,
yeah.
but high physical activity, especially walking, zone 1, zone 2 kind of stuff. It is as you get closer to my age, you wake up and you say, it's critical that I get to work in, even if I just do zone 1 work. And I cut my teeth on zone 3, 4, and 5. This is how, this as an athlete, this is where I lived. Well, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I now have to start to take a look at zone 1 and 2 and really investing in that space. And it's gold. It's
Yeah.
absolutely gold if you do.
Yeah, those are just some of the traits of these superagers that researchers have found. And these are not like things you need fancy equipment for. These are not that you need all the biohacking gadgets in the world. These are you don't need a expensive gym membership. So that's why I love it. And that's why I think it fits into this whole 90% healthy method that we're talking about here is that these small things add up so much over time and if done consistently and will make a difference in how well your brain and body's aging. Like one of the ladies that they interviewed and shared her story, she was talking about, I mean, she knits consistently, she belongs to a book club. I mean, she knits for homeless people. So she has a purpose into her late 80s.
How
She's
cool is that?
and it's so fascinating. And it's, like the previous episode, we talked about how all of the technology that we constantly doom scroll on is
Hmm.
atrophying our brain. They're not doing any of that. They're not on
No,
Facebook, just scrolling over and over again. They are active. They're doing things with other people
right.
in person. And it makes a huge difference in their outlook on the world as well. These individuals tend to have a more optimistic outlook. They are not in that fight or flight all the time, but they're rather in a more my cup is half full instead of half empty.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, as we start to take a look at that, listen, an inexpensive gym membership may be a great social tool. Okay. Now, I don't know how this works. I don't struggle for social relationships. I have my dad's personality. I meet people. I have good relationships. So and frankly, I like to train by myself. I don't like to
Yeah.
train with other people. But I'm sure there'll be a point in my life where I want to go somewhere to be around other people. And maybe that's the gym. And you know what? The nice thing about gym environments, most of them have this thing called silver sneakers. You practically can
Yeah.
go for free. So there's not an expense and you can kill 3 or 4 birds with one stone there. You can have social, you can do cardio, you can do, because you need both cardiovascular stimulus and you need strength stimulus. You need them both. It's not which one is better. You need both. And so these are the tools that start to come into play. I'll tell you what, I sit and I look at retirement communities. My mother made us swear that we would never put her in one of those. This was a fear of hers. Now, when we said, Mom, you don't have to worry about it, we'll take care of it, I think we alleviated that fear.
Yeah.
And my mom spent the rest of her life, the last 4 or 5 years of her life living with either me or one of my brothers, which was just a gift. It was just an absolute
Yeah.
gift. She did hospice in our home, which was, God damn it, it was hard, but it was a blessing. So, these things go hand in hand and it takes some thought. The same way if you're 20 and your thought is to be more competitive, you've got to make some plans. If you're in your mid 40s or 50s and you're looking at business and performance at that level, it takes some plans. Well, as you move into your third of life, You have to think about these things. So I don't belong to facilities. I do a podcast with a really cool 30-year-old that I engage with. I go to conferences and I run into tons of people that I have that while that device may be bad for doom scrolling, it's really good for connected distance relationships. And if you
Yeah.
use it that way, then it's beautiful. And if you use it correctly, it contributes to your entire tracking process. And we can spend more time talking. We've already spent a lot of time talking about it, but I think we continue to learn more when we discuss it.
Yes, I totally agree. And I look forward to these conversations every week because it is such a cool connection. It's not, I have calls about business stuff, but they don't give me that same satisfaction than
Hmm.
actually having an hour-long chat about the latest and just really picking each other brains on what we
Hmm.
think, what our life experiences, and how we can help other people based on what we've learned, what we've studied. And it's really cool. And it's just the two of us, but there are so many studies that we look at that involves hundreds of people. I mean,
Hmm.
just this research alone over the past 25 years that it's been going on, they've had like 300 participants. Currently, I think they have an active 111 participants. So it's a large pool of individuals, and they're not only studying them while they're alive, but a lot of them donates their brain to research when they pass, which gives these researchers additional tools and additional resources to look into the individual's brain at a microscopic level to
Right,
see what are things that are different.
right.
So I
That's
love
what's cool
this.
about that. So your next note, I think,
Yes.
are we down to resilience is built, not born?
Yes, I think so. We touched on a few different things, but I love that little tagline that no matter where you are, I mean, genetics do play a little bit of a role because the individuals, I mean, the researchers did say that there are certain genes that are prevalent at individuals who have developed Alzheimer's, and these
Hmm.
superagers did not have those genes. So there are, um, I wonder if they ever looked at or will be looking at individuals who are also superagers, yet they do have those genes. So I don't know if it ever becomes a question, but right now
It's
they do not have those
From a
genes.
correlational standpoint, the data has been pretty clear on this. That genetics is not your destiny. Your behaviors affect it's roughly an 80-20 kind of a role. 80% of your aging is a function of your behaviors, and your behaviors impact on your genetics, not your genetics just expressing themselves. That when
Uh-huh.
you do have this expression of a negative trait, a lot of times it's because of the absence of the positive behavior.
Yeah.
So listen, again, I had a huge fear. Heart attacks are interesting because from a generational standpoint, there's a lot of people that have heart attacks at the same age that their parents did or their grandparents. So as
Mm.
I was moving through that 58-year-old phase of my life,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm
I'm
here.
sure.
And as I move through that, I'm now starting to play in the 85-year phase of my life with looking at my mother's genetics, not necessarily my father's. And oh, by the way, I didn't smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Did I deal with my stress differently than what my father did? So that's part of it. So behaviors can take over this and are the dominant piece. So as you listen, I hope you learn that genetics are not your destiny.
And there are so many tools nowadays that you can implement to help rewire your brain chemistry and your neural connections. I've been listening to Joe Dispenza recently and some of the interviews that he had, and it is just incredible how heart brain coherence can create such an incredible change in the human
Hmm.
body. It,
That is also represented in improved HRV, by the way.
yes,
Um,
yes, they do
so
measure that.
so you're seeing that heart brain coherence, the behaviors that lead to improved heart brain coherence. You're seeing that lead to improved health outcomes. And oh, by the way, the biomarker or the key biomarker for that is hyper parasympathetic activation
Mm.
in the abs.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to look at sympathetic, lowering sympathetic, hyposympathetic, just hyper parasympathetic. brings you the benefit, which is
Yeah.
something you own. That's in your decision set. So that's really good stuff. And it affects from my young 18-year-old athletes all the way through our 85-year-old. I talk about the athletes, their parents, and their grandparents. Hits every
Mm,
age group. And
yeah.
the behavior, the positive behavior is phenomenal. Now, we're three-quarters of the way through this podcast right now. Maybe we need to spend some time talking about behaviors that are hypo and hyper parasympathetic so that people can start to work these. Maybe we save that for an episode or get a guest to talk
Yes.
about it. We can.
That would be very interesting. I'm noting that down. We will do that
Okay,
next
good.
episode or one of the following ones. It's because it's very interesting because once you're in the hyper parasympathetic, you are literally upregulating your innate intelligence to tell your body to heal,
Mm-hmm.
to regulate, to
Mm-hmm.
be in homeostasis, to quiet down that primal brain, to quiet down the fear response.
Yeah, lowering sympathetic. Yeah. That's exactly it. And what's interesting here is that you then get into a thing called flow state. Okay, flow
Yes.
state is this optimal experience. Well, I am convinced that flow state is a sympathetic parasympathetic co-activation. So sympathetic parasympathetic is not a teeter totter. Okay,
Yeah.
one's up, the other one's down. It doesn't work. It works like this. Okay, so they work independently of each other. And I had this thought originally, but then Stephen Kotler's book, Stealing Fire, he talks about I think it was a Naval Special Operations group going into an activation, and the leader of this group needed to take his guys out for a walk prior to engagement. So the march prior to the fight was critical, which is a great little parasympathetic boost. Listen, if you're a soldier and someone's shooting at you, you have sympathetic drive. Period. End of story. And my athletes, as you're going into an event, we don't need to worry about sympathetics. We need to manage parasympathetics. We need to manage that. And if you can get them both engaged, I'm convinced that's flow state, which is a really cool place to be.
I wonder, what is the brain blueprint for flow state? Are we in gamma in that sense? Do you think
I
we're
can't
reaching?
touch that right now. This is something I'm diving into. In fact, I had a long conversation with the manufacturer of a device that measures this yesterday,
Uh-huh.
because as we develop some new products, I want to develop products based on brain behavior. And
That's very
listen,
cool.
I would love to create a supplement that assists in the flow state. I don't believe you can get flow state just by dropping a pill.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course
I
not.
don't think that's the case. It's too complex. But I also want to make sure I have all the necessary neurotransmitters and neurotransmitter precursors in order to be able to formulate the enzymes and the ligands necessary to drive flow state.
Yeah.
So I can't answer that question right now, but I promise you I'll do the work and we'll get an answer for that.
I love that you brought up that you can out supplement flow state because that kind of brings us into the what are some of the actionable steps individuals can take to start pedaling toward that SuperAger
Mm-hmm.
state, and what is it that are myths in this longevity space that people would think that you can get into that? I certainly don't think that you can supplement your way to a SuperAger because that would not work
No, but
on its own.
you can, if something is absent, then you don't have a process that's working. NAD, for instance. NAD is such a critical molecule at so many levels, in intracellular levels. But I think we've gone off the charts with this. I don't know that there's data that suggests that IV NAD supplementation is any more effective than just simple like an NR, so nicotinamide riboside is one of the fundamental building blocks of NAD. And NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And this dinucleotide is kind of like two NMNs, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is built on what's called a nicotinamide riboside molecule. And there's a couple docs that I really trust that are looking at this NAD supplementation. They're saying it makes me nervous. But In the absence of NAD, in the absence of NR, you're shortening health span, lifespan. So you can't have the deficiency, but you also can't super supplement it too far. This is a Goldilocks thing. There's too little
Yeah.
is not right, too much is not right. You got to have just the right amount. So I think
Yeah.
this is a challenge that we've got to get worked out. But you certainly have to have the fundamental building blocks on board in order for the systems to work correctly.
I mean, I would agree that consistent supplementation with the precursors probably have a more long-term effect because I think what I've seen in the data is that when you're doing an IV, it will shoot your NAD levels up and then it will go back down rather rapidly. So it's short-term results and nobody's getting an NAD every week. So
Some
it's
people
what
are.
or an NR IV
Yeah,
or some
yeah,
people maybe are, but
yeah.
I don't think it's necessary. Well, I shouldn't say I don't think. I don't know whether it's actually raising your baseline of NAD levels if you're doing consistent IVs over doing consistent precursor supplementation.
Well, let me think about that. The challenge
Uh-huh.
is the NAD getting to where it needs to be? Is it getting to the nucleus of the cell, which is really important in a lot of genetic changes? But it's also, does it get into the mitochondria? Is it getting into the electron transport? NADH is the molecule that really gets, which is an NAD with an extra hydrogen on it. But that's why it's called electron transport. That
Uh-huh.
hydrogen is what moves between the complexes. And so this is the challenge that we have. Is it getting to where it needs to be, or do we have a system that is removing it because it's too high at the blood level or at the extracellular level? These are all challenges that you have to work.
Yeah, because it doesn't at the end of the day, when you do NAD, IV, or what have you, doesn't the body still break it down to its parts and then rebuild it?
I don't know how it can't. This
Hmm.
is, and this is relatively state of the art kind of stuff. The work that's been done at Harvard in the aging facility there with NMN, very
Yeah.
clear. It's one of these activators of the genetic process that drives autophagy. We're back to autophagy. So it works in that space as well. And we saw this with spermidine. We know that
Yeah.
there are spermidine deficiencies from our food sources. So this is the challenge. But I think when we start talking about what can we do, making sure that you have at least the base of the necessary small molecules on board so that you can age effectively, and that lack of a ligand or that lack of an enzyme doesn't lead to a problem.
Okay. I want to give our listeners some actionable takeaways how to be on track to be a super ager. And a lot of these we talked about, so I just want to recap in just a few, and please add if I forget something. But I think you need to move your body consistently, walks. You need to move your brain, stretch your brain. You need to learn things. If we
Yes.
stop learning, we start getting really, really old, especially our brains. I mean, and
Fast.
you don't have to, you know, get a lexicon and learn a whole new thing, but do small things, do memory games, do puzzles, do cognitive tasks that challenge your brain to figure stuff out. We're really good at figuring stuff out if we put
Yes.
the power in that. Invest in social connections because those are super important and have a purpose. Those are a little bit connected, as you have
Yep.
mentioned. And obviously, the study didn't really talk a lot about nutrition and how these superagers ate. So obviously, more whole foods, less ultra processed foods will always be better. And yeah, have a little bit more optimistic outlook on life.
We live in the best time in the history of mankind to be on the earth.
Yeah.
There's reasons for optimism. I realize the TV and your phone and are full of bad news. I recognize that. And I'll tell you, it's important sometimes just to turn it off, just to walk away. So Laura and I, so we watch political TV. I like politics. It's a game that I enjoy. And right now, I'm on the losing team. Okay, this is why I don't like where I'm at right now. And I have conversations with people about it's making me crazy. I want us to become a winning team. So
Yeah.
but I'll tell you, I've pretty much stopped. We had stopped listening to the radio a long time ago. I'd shifted over to cable news And when we're driving, we'll listen to cable news across our Sirius XM radio when we're driving. I've turned that off. Almost 100% of my driving listening is podcasts now. I have a stack of podcasts that no human will ever get through, but I constantly have a resource to listen to and to listen and learn. That's the key to my podcast. I'm
Yeah.
looking for something new. I'm looking to learn for something new. You know, we just had Nawaz Habib on our podcast. I was just on his podcast with JP Erico. I can't wait for it to come out.
That's
But just
exciting.
the process of, number one, showing up at AFM in Las Vegas last winter, happening to see a presentation that caught my attention on cognitive healing, cognitive performance, reaching out, the desire to learn. I reached out to the company. I finally get connected to the presenter of the presentation, which is Dr. Nawaz Habib. Reached out to him. I said, listen, I want to be on your, and here's what's crazy about, I wound up I filled out a patient intake form on his
Mhm.
website. And I said, and I'm not a patient. Well, he sent me a note. He says, listen, I tried to save these times for my patients, but let's do this on a Tuesday. So we get it on the Tuesday. We have a great conversation. He comes on our podcast. I go on his podcast. Turns out JP is faculty at one of my favorite places in the world, the Institute of Human and Machine Cognition down at Pensacola, where I got to go
Mm.
speak at a few years ago, which was a life-changing event for me. So the world is big, but the world is small.
Yeah.
And the only way you know that is the willingness to step out and find
Yeah.
these things. Okay. Don't wait for them to come. Go take them.
Yes.
So yeah, I guess that's my social. I'm the
That's
obnoxious person that you may not know, but you're going to.
But that's such a good trait to have because you're not waiting around for life happen to you. You make life happen for you.
Is the trait obnoxiousness or is the trait a willingness to search? I just need to clarify there.
It's the trait of willingness to
Uh,
search and
okay.
willingness to reach out. Because a lot of people wouldn't, like, you have nothing to lose to reach out to another human being because
Nothing.
you're reaching out with an open heart, an open mind, and kindness.
Yes.
And it is very likely that's what you're going to get in return, much like what happened with Dr. Nawaz Habib. So
Yes.
it's such a wonderful story to represent that you had no connection. You were not referred. It was just your willingness to go out of your way and reach out to another human being and look at where it took you. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I remember years ago the lacrosse coach at Ohio State when Jacqueline was there. If you're a coach and we have a conversation, I will discuss something I've seen in performance. Oh, by the way, you might want to check this out. You want to see this. Here's a book you might want to read. And she said to me, she says, how do you remember all this stuff? And I don't have a great memory. I have a scaffolding. I have a scaffolding of understanding of these things that I'm able to bolt these concepts onto. When I hear a podcast, when I read a book, when I see something, I'm like, oh, this fits in this section here, which then gives me the ability to remember it. Now, many times I have to go back and look it up. I have to go back and pull this information. I know there's a relationship, but I don't understand it exactly. So I go back, and the more you do that, the more you learn and the more it becomes present. The study talks about the role of the hippocampus. Okay, that hippocampus is actually supercharged. Well, we know that people who have high spermidine levels have thicker hippocampuses than people that don't. Okay, so that autophagy process is doing
Yeah.
something there. Number one. Number two is we know that hippocampus drives so much. It is where learning happens. Yeah, it's where learning happens. And we drop that in. So again, we're really developing some new pretty cool concepts here. We talked about vagal nerve stimulation in the Nawaz Habib podcast. We're going to wind up spending as much time talking about vagal nerve stimulation as we've spent talking about HRV. I'll warn our audience right now because there is benefit and there is value there. So that's how we go. That's my social.
That's awesome. And so many
Obnoxiousness.
times, I mean, it could be obnoxious if they told you that they don't want to meet, but you keep banging on the door. Then you
Oh,
would
that's persistence.
perfect.
That's
Yeah.
persistence. And there's there's a slight difference. Like I said, I think
Yeah,
I fall across into
there's
obnoxiousness, but that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I play around with my brother and just kind of joke around and poke him and bother him a little. I'm like, "Am I obnoxious yet? Am I obnoxious yet?"
Yeah,
I was like, "Yes."
yeah, yeah. That's good.
But yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
you don't
Other good one. I had a really good I'm glad we brought this up. It was very last minute
you
for our
build
listeners.
the capacity to bounce back, but it takes daily reps. This is the
Yeah.
important part. It takes those reps,
Yes.
both physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Yeah.
And the more you build physical and mental, you will have emotional bandwidth to deal with obnoxious people like me.
That's good. We all have emotional resiliency. Physical resiliency. Ah, there we have I love that. I think maybe at the beginning of 90% Healthy, we didn't have this, or at least maybe I didn't have the whole clarity around that. What I would like our audience to really take away from each of these episodes is that we don't want to give them the perfect plan. We want to give them a path to resilient
Hmm.
health that doesn't take away that doesn't create complete madness in their head
The
and
tools.
confusion.
Help them with the tools that we may discover along the way. You know what's funny about this, Claudia, is years ago, God, this is 1980, 1990. I had finished up grad school. I was working in a couple different jobs, but a really good friend of mine comes to me and says, "Hey, I need someone to teach a course in exercise science at the community college." And it's Columbus State, which is a pretty big community college. He says, "Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah, it sounds pretty cool." And I had no intention of being a professor, but I went over to teach a course in exercise science. And what happened was, in order to teach well, I had to develop an even better understanding of the
Mhm.
topics than what I
Yeah.
had prior. So there was a lot of times I'm driving to teach a class and I'm still looking up stuff to figure out, okay, how do I
Yeah.
explain calorie burn versus METs versus watts? It made me sharper. And to let the cat out of the bag, I don't really do this podcast primarily while there may be benefit that comes from our audience, I do it because I learn.
Yeah.
Okay. Bouncing
I agree.
ideas off of you, working on these topics, it keeps me learning. That's why I do it. So it's the same reason I taught. Love it. This is just the modern day, and I choose to engage on it. So whether your background is in woodworking or in knitting or in anything else, the better job you do of learning to explain this to someone who doesn't know, the smarter you get, the better understanding, the deeper, the thicker your hippocampus gets. That's the reason to stay engaged, is to keep teaching.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one thing to understand something and just know it, and it's a completely different thing to be able to teach another person that thing.
Oh,
I totally noticed that. And frankly, this podcast really helps me to be able to articulate the things I've learned, the studies I've looked at, because they may make sense to me once I read it, but I have to really reframe it in my head to be able to re-say it and rephrase it and tell
hmm,
people about it in a way that they understand without any background in science,
right,
journalism,
right,
or what have you. So yeah,
right. So
we
if
all
you're
learn. We're here
listening,
to learn.
if you're listening and you have a topic that you would like to have us explore and maybe more effectively communicate, please let us know. We are excited to do things like that. You can get a hold of Claudia at longevityjournalist.com. Is that correct? You can get a hold of me at trainrecoverwin.com. You can find us both on LinkedIn. We will respond to messages at both. We put a lot of information up on social media, particularly Instagram. Claudia does a wonderful job of staying engaged there and responding. I do a half-assed job of putting hearts next to her
Okay, okay.
responses. But if you reach out to us directly, we promise we will not turn you away and help us learn. So we
Yes,
appreciate
help
that.
us learn. Yeah, and comment if you know a SuperAger and what their life is like. We'd be
I
curious
love
to
that.
hear. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you
Claudia,
so much for tuning in.
have a good day. Have a good week. We'll see you all next week.
See you next week. Thanks, Don.